Beaven-Marks. I know it says Dr Kate Beaven-Marks there. My doctorate was in hypnosis, teaching and learning. So I had the very rare privilege and extreme expense of spending about 6 years sitting in on a vast amount of hypnosis teaching. I did quick courses, long courses, distance learning, by CD, by very cheap and nasty manuals, you name it, I tried it. The advantage of that, of course, is that now, as a trainer, I can build all of that information into what I present. I also encountered so many different presentation styles, teaching styles, that I hope it's made the way I present a little bit more beneficial. So today we're here to look at quite a simple concept. Some of the theories around CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, and rational emotional behaviour therapy can initially be presented as quite complex. Let's just have a show of hands. Does anybody here already use CBT or REBT in their practice? One. Is it CBT or REBT? CBT. CBT, thank you. And a maybe or a definite?
I use elements, but I'm not fully trained.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hopefully today we'll add a new insight for yours. The rest of you get to discover something new. I don't often use the full protocol as a standalone because I'm a hypnotist. So I use it within my hypnosis practice. And I use it in a lot of different ways. As you'll discover, you can use it at various parts throughout the session and throughout the treatment program. How it works best, I find, is often in that initial consultation. And it's interesting, there's a saying by Epictetus, I think it's 400 BC, AC, a long while ago, who said that man isn't disturbed by events. He's disturbed by his beliefs about those events. And I'll give you a classic example. Say you get made redundant from your job. Do you have that phrase here? Yeah, they say we no longer need you. Okay, they're letting you go. They don't want you anymore, whichever way it says. And let's say, none of you look like you work in a bar. No, I'm not going to create any traumas by talking about bar work. So let's say you work in a bar. And they turn around and they say to you, we're going to have to let you go. Now, if your belief about your job was that you must have a job to validate your life, and if you didn't have a job, it would be the end of the world. If you got laid off, it would cause disturbance. Whereas, if you believed about your job, it was just part of what you did, it gave you your quality of life, but you're a strong, valuable member of the community and you'll get another job, probably even better, it's going to cause much less disturbance. You're going to have a much more positive view. So the being laid off actually wasn't the thing that disturbed you. If it did, it was your view about it. Does that make sense? Cool. Now, in the literature about REBT and CBT, if you read a lot of the books, especially at a practitioner level, they use complicated terminology. And I've done my best to sort of break that down today, to put it into practical language. That's all the fault of my business partner sitting at the front. He doesn't do terminology, so I've learned to adapt to suit him. Now, does everybody have a little leaflet? I do apologise that they're quite small. The print is tiny. My luggage coming over here was already very heavy. Well, you know us ladies, we like to take the kitchen sink, maybe the wardrobe, and at least 500,000 pairs of shoes. So if I printed these off 4 pages to a handout, my excess baggage would have been huge. But hopefully all of it will be here. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at an overall. We're going to look at thoughts, situations and responses, which is on the first page. And then we're going to turn over and have a look at unhelpful beliefs and helpful beliefs. And 3 approaches for disputing beliefs, because it's all very well identifying beliefs that are unhelpful, but what do you do with them? And we're going to cover that. You might be surprised at how simple that concept is as well. And then it's all very well having a bit of intellectual understanding, knowing that your belief isn't as helpful as it could be, but how do you change it? We'll look at that. And then finally, because I do believe the best way to get to grips with something is to do it, you're going to be doing some work on it today. So we'll get you to pair up or in little groups of 3, and you get to work through your own example. So perhaps as I'm talking, you can already start to consider how this might relate to something minor in your life that would benefit from a bit of improvement. But let's start, and I'll work through the handout so that it's clear for you, because this is also on the CD. Thoughts, situations and responses. Now, interestingly, this is called the ABC model. Activating event, beliefs and cognitions. The translated version of that is the situation, your belief, your response. Now, the situation can actually be in the past. So, oh, it was bad before, so it's going to be bad again. It could be in the present. It's not great at the moment. Or it could be in the future. You're thinking ahead to how bad something's going to be, perhaps. The belief we tend to think of as irrational or rational, or you could think of it as unhelpful or helpful. Whichever label you want to put onto it is really fine. And it's good when you're working with clients or patients to consider with them the strength of their belief. Scaling is really useful generally when you're taking a case history or consultation, so that you get an idea, because say you're working with pain. They come in, they're in a lot of pain. You do some amazing work collaboratively, and that pain level drops. They'll forget how bad it was to start with. So it's good for them to understand that there's been movement. And that helps validate and enhance the work that you do with them. Now the belief, there's an example. My clients should always be nice to me. It's unbearable if they shout at me. Sometimes we do expect our clients to always think we're wonderful. It's their belief. Might be helpful or unhelpful for us to maintain that. Now, our belief about that situation, whether helpful or unhelpful, leads to our response, our behaviour. And it can be our behaviour or our emotions or a mix of both. And it's commonly a mix of both. So we may act a certain way, we may develop symptoms of some sort, we may feel happy, we may feel sad, we may feel a whole host of other emotions. So if we turn over onto unhelpful beliefs and helpful beliefs, unhelpful beliefs come from an irrational perspective. They tend to be without support. The biggest category of them tends to be demands. Now, I wonder how many of you have heard a client say to you, I should be able to cope with my husband better. I should be able to balance the 50 million things in my life that I'm doing and do it better. I should be able to lose weight even though I'm eating 3 cakes a day. I'm sure you've heard that one before. or maybe not 3, just 2. So you will hear these shoulds, these absolutist demands. What other absolutes might you get as well as should? What do you think you might hear people say? Ought, absolutely. Must, totally. I must be able to do this. No room for anything outside of that. Should, must, ought, have to, need to, ought to. And these are absolutes. Can't, perhaps not. So my clients must always think I'm wonderful. Even if I'm having a really bad day and not putting as much energy into the work as I possibly could. So to contrast with that, what we can do is to help them move towards a more helpful belief. And these tend to be objective, justifiable. They also tend to be flexible. And we know that flexibility is one of our keys to survival. Flexibility can also lead to happiness. We're not placing the absolute demands on us, so there's room for wiggling. There's room for things to not be perfect all the time. And we tend to think about these as preferences. So I would prefer my client not to shout at me, but accept that on occasion they may get excited and they may shout. That leaves us more room to accept a situation than necessarily having this absolute belief that my client should never shout at me. Does that make sense? Over time, we get into a habit. We're starting to talk more and more, particularly at this conference, about neural pathways. And we know that the mind, it likes shortcuts. How many of you, and I'm not expecting to see many hands, actually, how many of you, when you got dressed this morning, thought, oh, I must put that foot in that hole for my trousers, if you're wearing trousers, and then I must move it up a little bit and then put that foot in, and you didn't have to think about every step, did you? When you opened the door or walked through the door to come into the room, you didn't think about every step because the mind has created shortcuts. And actually, if we had to think about simple tasks like pouring a cup of coffee and relearn everything from scratch, we would never do anything. Now, those shortcuts are fantastic at helping us get on with our everyday lives. But those shortcuts aren't always helpful. And I'm sure everybody in this room has a couple of unhelpful little habits that are just automatic. We automatically reach for the donut if we see a pile of them. Or, I didn't really. Or we automatically feel irritated when somebody cuts in front of us on the motorway or the highway. So we have these shortcuts, they're either helpful or unhelpful. And our responses to situations can be shortcuts. We get into a habit, without even thinking about it, of responding to things the same way. I had a client who was a London cab driver, and he'd spent about 10 years driving around London, chilled, very relaxed, not bothered, very sort of, okay, the traffic's mad, it's fine, life will happen. And then he had a bit of a change because he had a family. And he was in that lovely period where you don't get an awful lot of sleep. So his tolerance level for anything reduced. And he developed quite a lot of shoulds about driving in London. Now, has anybody ever driven in London? No. The pace is a little bit quicker than you might experience in other areas. People do daft things. I think they actually look just to the end of the front of the car and perhaps not any further. They'll quite happily pull out halfway across a junction and stop and make everybody wait until there's a gap, and all sorts of things that you might not do here, or you'd get hit if you did, as in a car would collide. So his tolerance levels changed, and his shoulds were: people should not cut in front of me. Cyclists should not cycle in front of me. And he had about 10. It was quite interesting because he had so many to work on all at once. So you can develop more than one should or absolute belief about a situation. The wonder there was to scale them and work with the biggest one first. Now, some people might work with the simplest one first as a warm-up to help the client understand the process, and you can do that. This guy seemed to be the sort of guy that liked a big win first. So I went for the biggest one, also as a bit of a convincer. And what you can find is if you work for the big unhelpful beliefs first, the rest start to crumble. So it can make it a lot easier working from the biggest down. But you can work from the smallest up. A question?
Could you give an example of what this fellow wanted? What was his biggest?
The question was, could I give an example of what this fellow wanted? The biggest one, which was a 98.5. Now, I don't know where he got the 0.5 from. The biggest one was, people should not cut in front of me. His next one down from memory was about 81, which was pedestrians must not walk in front of me. And pedestrians will, if there's slow-moving traffic, they'll just walk in front of you to cross the road.
Where does the ranking come from? It's 98.5.
It was how much did that disturb you? The ranking came from how much did that disturb you from 0, not at all disturbed, to 100 being completely disturbed.
And this person ranked himself?
Yeah, the person, I asked him for a score, and he gave me the score. And I made a note of that. I wasn't expecting quite so many unhelpful beliefs, I've got to say. I had to turn the piece of paper over to list the rest. That's why I remember him. He was quite a character. The happy ending is that he's now driving a lot more comfortably. Although I suspect baby sleeping through the night is also helping that. So, what we do in our consultation is we listen out for these unhelpful beliefs. You might just say, how do you feel about driving in London? Because he came to me, he said, I need some help with stress. He said, I just can't cope with driving in London, it's my job, what do I do? So I'm like, tell me about it, tell me about a typical day. And that's when I got all of these shoulds, must, ought tos, have tos, fantastic long list of them.
Excuse me, why are these unhealthy beliefs? Because I also believe that pedestrians shouldn't be walking in front of cars.
They're unhelpful if they disturb you. So for him, it was a considerable disturbance. And what happens when we're disturbed? We tend to have a response in some certain ways. So thank you for the question, it was a good one. It leads me on to my next point. And what tends to happen is we have low frustration tolerance, awfulizing, and self-damning. And I'm going to go through those three now. Low frustration tolerance is I can't bear it. Now that's actually irrational because you are bearing it. If you think about it, you can't bear it, but you're actually bearing it. You're just finding the situation disturbing. So they may say to you, I should be able to drive in London without cars cutting in front of me. I can't bear it. They might say, it's awful, it's the end of the world. So if you were working in a bar, you got laid off, it's the end of the world. Well, actually, it isn't the end of the world because the world's still going and going and going. It hasn't stopped. but it's a very large response. The interesting one, because they're sort of general environmental disturbances in a way. The interesting one's the third one, the self-damning. And you may get this for something like the bar work, where it's the end of the world and it shows that I'm a bad person, or I'm a stupid person because I can't maintain a job. So people may respond with, I can't bear it, which the literature talks of as a low frustration tolerance. They might talk about it being the end of the world, terrible, which the literature calls awfulizing. Or they might talk in terms of self-damning. Because of this little incident, globally, I'm rating myself as a whole. So I had a student for one of the big London universities, and he actually came to me and said, I've always done really well in my exams, and I have to get over 90% in my final exam. If I don't, I can't bear it. It really will be the end of the world, and it will show that I am a stupid person. What if you got 89%? He said, that would be terrible. That gives you quite a lot to work with. Interestingly, he chose a really difficult topic and was very happy with 75% in the end. So, we're on to 3 approaches for disputing unhelpful and irrational beliefs. This is the simple bit. It's simple, but actually it works. Because it's about questioning. And we've all had this. You've been set on an idea and then your friends say, you know, is that jacket really the right colour for you? And you're thinking, okay, maybe fluorescent orange isn't quite the thing to wear to my friend's wedding. You'd had your mind set on it, but just a gentle question just got you to think about it differently. So the first one is evidence. And the literature talks about this being empirical. So where is the evidence for that? So where's the universal law that says that cars will never jump in front of you when you're driving down the road? They'll never cut in front of you. Where's the universal law for that? And you might think, well, there isn't one really. And that just creates an opportunity then to start working on a preference. I'm going to come up to that in a moment. So it might be that you could prefer cars not to jump in front of you. But accept that on occasion, people are imperfect, we all are, and they might just not check their mirrors that time when you're near. And then there's logical. How logical is it? So just because you think, your clients should always think you're wonderful, does it follow that they always will? You might be asking them these questions and making them work quite hard. So they might not always think you're wonderful. They might think you're jolly effective, but they might not always feel warm and fluffy about you. And then help. Now, help in the literature comes under pragmatic. And it really is, how does maintaining that belief, that absolutist belief, how does it actually help you? What do you get out of it? And often clients will think, well, it's disturbing me. I'm getting upset. Actually, I don't know how it will help. And there's a very nice little technique that you can do as a role play if you like that type of work or it's appropriate for your clients. And what you can do is you can get them either in hypnosis or just with eyes closed perhaps, get them to visualise being in a courtroom scenario and sitting there, and they've got to defend their unhealthy belief. You know, they're in the dock. I'm presuming you call it the dock here. Do you call it a dock here? The stand? Yep, they're in the stand. And the prosecutor's there, up close, asking these questions. And then you can get them to formulate their healthy belief and get them to defend their healthy belief to the prosecutor as well. And it's quite interesting how that really will strengthen the healthy belief, because they're having to come up with arguments to support their preference instead. Question at the back.
Yeah, just for clarification, would you have the client be on the stand itself, or have their belief be on the stand and have them be the defense attorney for it?
Either way, the question was, would you have them on the stand themselves or be the defense attorney or the defense lawyer for that themselves? And it can be done either way. Sometimes it's good to associate the client into that moment. If it seems to you that they're really holding on to that belief, it can be quite good to actually get them really engaged. Other times, it can be good to have a slightly dissociative effect and have the belief there. So you're almost doing a bit of parts work, in a way, which can be quite nice, and then have that as the defence. So it's interesting, and certainly well worth doing a little bit of research on yourselves if you like this approach. Thank you for the question. So we have these three. This, where's the evidence, where's the logic, and how helpful it is. And what we're generally working towards is working towards getting preferences to balance out our absolute demands. Now, if you wish to develop that further, you can look at anti-orphalizing, or it's not the end of the world. High frustration tolerance, so I can bear it, instead of low frustration, I can't bear it. And instead of self-damning, self-acceptance. Now, I mentioned earlier, it's all very well having this intellectual understanding of this new preference, this healthier belief. How do we get it to translate into action? Because that is a really key point. And there's two areas where CBT and REBT can challenge a client excessively if you're not tactful in your approach. Not everybody can cope with being challenged, so use your discretion as to how vigorously you do that. And then getting the integration, and there's two things I feel that really make a difference. A commitment for change and a contract for action. So that's the first one. It's about coming up with ways that they can engage their new healthy belief. So for my taxi driver, it was, I would like you to drive on your next shift, and whenever you say to yourself, you're hearing yourself say, oh, these cars shouldn't come in front of me, you actively say to yourself, stop. I prefer these cars not to come in front of me, but except from time to time they will. Effectively, what he's doing is creating a new neural pathway, a new shortcut. And over time, what happens is that pathway becomes so much stronger than the old one that it becomes the preferred shortcut rather than the old way. The old way will never disappear completely, as far as cognitive neuroscience we believe at the moment. However, the mind likes the easiest option, so it will go to the stronger pathway. Now, the other bit is, and this is where we're so good because we're hypnotists, we're hypnotherapists, we can engage on an extra level. So what we can do whether you call it pseudo-orientation in time or future pacing or mental rehearsal, is within hypnosis, we can take a client to the situations where they normally respond with an unhelpful belief, and we can help them to practice, to rehearse coping better in those situations, to engage with those new helpful beliefs. And this really does make a difference. It's just like for those of you that ever do performance anxiety. If you have somebody who's nervous about giving a talk, what they'll do before they come to see you as a practitioner is they'll be thinking, oh, my legs will be shaking when I walk in the room. And what if the PowerPoint stops? I'll be lost for words. And what if nobody comes? Or what if they ask me different questions? I'll be terrible. And they mentally rehearse all the ways of doing it wrong. And then the minute they walk into the room, their mind goes, aha, I know how to deal with this. I'm going to give you wobbly legs. I'm going to make you forget your words because we practice this. True? So what we do with mental rehearsal, future pacing, pseudo-orientation in time, is we help them practice the right way. But there's a way of getting that even better. What you do is you get them to practice the ideal situation, and then you start to incorporate little challenges. So for my taxi driver, I incorporated another taxi driver with road rage. And he learned in hypnosis how he would prefer to respond to that situation. So instead of just practicing the ideal, you can practice responding well to challenging environments. And that's what makes it a lot more effective. A lot more effective. Because your clients then go out with the belief that actually they have got the resources to deal with those situations now. And even more so, if blips occur, they can probably handle them because they've already handled quite a few of them in the session. So ultimately, to summarise before I get you to do a little bit of work, ultimately, it's about helping somebody identify where their beliefs about a situation, whether past, present or future, whether their beliefs are helpful or unhelpful. Where they are unhelpful and causing disturbance, then you can help them change to a more helpful belief, which will change their behaviour as a result, or their symptoms, or their emotions, or all three. Any questions quickly before I give you a little bit of work to do? One question.
I want to say something. My kids are in their 30s, but I know when I run across my husband's partners all have kids that are teenagers. And so I always say when they have a daughter, because I only had daughters, that I always ask them, it took me a while to learn, but instead of saying, you have to clean your room before you do blah, blah, blah. Because with my one daughter, that, like the stop signs went off, she was going to argue with me.
Uh-huh.
So after a while, I just kept saying, I would prefer that you wear such and such. I would prefer that, and it took a lot of the fight out of every, because sometimes with teenagers, it can be a fight about anything. But I would just say, and I tell these other parents, I just said, if you just say, I prefer that you wear this outfit, I said, it just takes the fight out of it, and 9 times out of 10, they'll go along with you.
Yes, the lady at the front, Kristen, mentioned about preferences. And instead of saying to teenagers, you have to, she would say, I prefer. Now, hands up in the room, who likes being told you have to do something? No hands up at all. And sometimes it makes us feel a bit like a kid. I'm not doing it now because you said I had to do it. So we might even rebel. We'll push against it. Whereas absolutely preferences, we're like, oh, well, I could consider that then. And you're putting the idea there. Quick question.
The change in language makes it a request rather than a demand.
Absolutely, the change in language makes it a request, not a demand. And why shouldn't we request things of ourselves instead of demanding things? No, we have expectations, our friends are nice to us, so why do we beat ourselves up? Perhaps we could just be nice to ourselves and have requests instead.